lack of time, they have changed this, like they have bring equilibrium a little later, and they bring chaos so that they could grasp the attention of the audience.
Nikat, it's a very interesting comment. You see, we discussed Todorov's concept of propositions, and those of you who are joining today, maybe just something about Todorov. Todorov talked about narrative syntax, and as you know that in structuralist theory, syntax is used to talk about the structure of a narrative. So in this particular case, we were talking about Todorov, and Todorov identified five important elements in a narrative. First important element is equilibrium. That means when a tale opens, it begins with say this element called equilibrium. It means that there is say perfect state of harmony. There is no conflict, and then this particular state is followed by another state, and which is that state? That other state.
So it's force.
Just a minute, there is some problem. Some people have not got the link, so maybe I'll just right. Nikhat had a very interesting question. She's talking about a movie where she says that this state of equilibrium is simply not there. It is perfectly possible, Nikhat, right? And that's why when we say that many of these theories are talking about certain, please don't send me any WhatsApp messages anymore. Please don't. I'm okay. Nikhat had this question that in a movie that she's talking about, there is no element of equilibrium at the beginning. Usually, you have equilibrium at the very beginning, and then that state of equilibrium is followed by invasion by enemy, and this enemy can be a physical enemy. This enemy can be an idea which is very different from the idea which is probably um, I'll just wait for a minute because I'm just distracted by these WhatsApp messages. Please don't send any more WhatsApp messages now, please. Please don't. So the question was, there is a film where this element of equilibrium, which Todorov talks about, does not exist. I think it's a very fair comment that there can be any number of films where maybe you don't have these things, because after all Todorov is talking about a kind of master key. He is talking about a kind of master structure which is common to many narratives, right? But important thing about his method is that his method can possibly apply to a number of narratives, number of films, number of television serials also, in a more general sort of way. So you have that state of equilibrium at the beginning. And what is meant by that state of equilibrium? There is no conflict, there is harmony. If it is a family, then family is interacting, people are happy, there is no tension as such, and they are living in perfectly harmonious world. But usually this harmonious world exists for a very, very short while in most films. And in certain films, it can simply be just one single shot. But as Nikhat is saying, you can also add some examples where this state of harmony does not say exist at the beginning. And of course, you can multiply these examples, but probably you will find more examples of this kind of harmony existing at the beginning of a film. Whether this state of harmony is brief or long, it is a different question altogether. Second important thing is that second important element is that this state of equilibrium is followed by another state. And what is that state? That is force, and that is force 1. So here when force 1 happens, an enemy attacks. In action films, it is probably the entry of the villain, or it is the entry of an idea which is not there at the beginning, but that idea introduces an element of conflict. In a comedy, maybe, or in a romantic film, maybe entry of a hero or of entry of a heroine who enters the life of our hero or who enters the life of our heroine. So maybe a brief encounter and some kind of disruption happens in that smooth narrative. After that, what we see is that when that smooth narration is disrupted by a certain kind of force, a villain, a different idea, or number of villains, anything is possible. And you have that element of conflict, and you also have a particular state after this, which is called disequilibrium. That means harmony is gone and disequilibrium follows because of the entry of a different idea or because of the entry of villain. Now from here onwards, what you see that there are series of actions on the part of the hero, on the part of the villain, and they are in conflict, and the story moves. And if you are thinking about the story from the point of view of an audience, then you are interested in the action because villain is doing something, hero is doing something, or maybe heroine, if it is a romantic film, is doing something, and hero is doing something, or if it is family, then family is creating maybe some obstacles, or maybe a different idea is creating some kind of conflict in the world of the hero or the heroine or the protagonist. So gradually, this state of equilibrium will lead us to a state where something will be resolved. Either that idea will be defeated, villain will be defeated, or say a new situation arises. But this means that some of those conflicts will be resolved in some way. And this means we achieve a state called force 2, where villain or a different idea will be defeated. And the final state is that of equilibrium. In other words, you can say that in many films you have the device of happy ending. And so happy ending is also an aspect of equilibrium. But this equilibrium is very different from the equilibrium which existed at the beginning, because some movement has taken place. Some evolution has taken place. In between, many characters have come. In between, many ideas have been explored. And so the final state of equilibrium is very different from the first state of equilibrium which existed at the beginning. But Nikal's question is important, and her question is that there is a movie where this state does not exist. Fair, it cannot. Probably in all films, it cannot. Probably in all narratives, and different writers also employ different methods. But since Todorov is talking about a work, Boccacio's Decameron, and he had in his mind that work, but he was also thinking about providing a kind of master key to all narratives. So that way his method succeeds, but maybe not always. And here lies the importance of another very important theorist, whose name is Rene Barthes. Anyone has a comment at this point? Just unmute yourself and say, Nikhat, are you there?
Yes,
Did you
yes,
understand?
I'm there.
Yeah, did you understand this part?
Sir,
Right.
I couldn't get your voice.
Oh, my voice is not clear today. What about others? Are they following me? Please.
There is a lot of disturbance. Your voice is distorted and it's coming in bits and pieces. So a few words are dropping in the process actually. I don't know if it's happening only with me or with everyone else.
But your voice is very clear. Am I clear now? No.
Okay.
Hmm? I'm coming
No, sir,
closer
you
to
are
my
not clear.
laptop, maybe. Am I clear now? Okay, we are talking about structuralist narratology, and we are discussing one important aspect in structuralist narratology, and that is ideas of Todorov, who is a very important name in structuralist narratology. And we talked about his concept of propositions, and you know that this is part of his whole analysis, where you have one element called stories, and then another element below that, sequence consists of five prepositions. Usually these five prepositions can be found in narratives, in all narratives, in most narratives. And when we say narrative, because film is also a form of narrative, so you'll find many of the almost all these prepositions in a film also. But this is not true in absolute sense, as Nikhat pointed out, because you can always give examples of tales, stories, films where this neat division of prepositions does not apply. Yes, I'm very sorry. We probably spent 10 minutes trying to understand each other. But what you can say is that this is one very important theme in all literature. And what is that? Lack of communication. Lack of communication is a very important theme in literary theory also, especially when we discuss another important position, say a few days from now, that is reconstruction. But anyway, so we can just repeat what we have been discussing. And now very quickly, I'll try to first bring the question that Nikhat raised. And the question was, she talked about film where this structuralist notion of division given by Todorov did not apply. And what is that idea of Todorov? And very quickly, Todorov talks about what is called story, and a level below that is sequence. A sequence consists of five prepositions, and preposition is a unit. Preposition is a unit, just as function is a unit in prop, so preposition is a unit in Todorov. So here, when those five prepositions are discussed, they have been used widely to talk about different narratives and also about film, because films are also form of narratives. So first preposition is, there is perfect state of harmony when any narrative opens. This goes by the name of equilibrium. Then this equilibrium is disrupted, and this is the state preposition which is called force one. That means some force is introduced, some, and say maybe an enemy is there, maybe a villain is there, maybe a different idea is there, maybe a different viewpoint is there. But all these things, a villain, a different idea, a different viewpoint, a different point of view, maybe family representing that different point of view, all these elements introduce disruption. They disrupt the harmony, and what they do, they introduce this stage where you have the presence of this idea which will be part of the narrative. Then the protagonist is face to face with this idea, with enemy, with villain, with a different view of life. And what happens is that before he comes to defeat them, there is a state of disequilibrium. And this disequilibrium lasts for a fairly, say, long period of time in narratives. It can, it lasts for a fairly long period of time in many action films, disequilibrium. And our hero is plotting to do something, villain is plotting to do something, a romantic hero is trying to achieve something, a romantic heroine is trying to achieve something, because this idea of prepositions applies to both genres, whether it is tragedy or it's a comedy, or maybe other forms of narratives. So this equilibrium will end when that force will be defeated, or the enemy will be defeated, or the villain will be put to task. But before the villain is put to task, before a different idea is taken note of, defeated, or somehow it is changed, a lot of action would have taken place in the story. A lot of action, series of actions on the part of characters. And when that state is reached where that different idea is taken note of, or villain is defeated, then you reach this state called force 2, right? Where villain is defeated, or a different idea is liquidated, or it is adapted in some way, or it is possibly taken note of by the original idea in some way. And the final state is again equilibrium, which is usually there in the form of happy endings, which is there usually in the form of some kind of resolution of different ideas, even contrary ideas. But that state is not the same state as it was there at the beginning of the narrative or at the beginning of the film, because a lot of action would have taken place and many new people would have joined the action, and maybe somebody would have lost something, somebody would have gained something. So the state of affairs is very different from what it was at the beginning. And so we talk about these 5 important propositions and how they can possibly apply to number of narratives. And as I pointed out, that Todorov, or for that matter, before him Prop, they were in search of a master key which could unravel everything, which could possibly provide a clue to all narratives. And so you have a narrative and you use this key and you get some idea about the structure of that narrative. That is the idea of Todorov, and that is the idea of Vladimir Prop. Many other theories also, A.J. Grimus also laid down this notion. And as I said the other day, that Prop's work is central to this entire debate, because many other theorists who come after Prop, they have tried to adapt his work, they have tried to interpret his work, they have tried to reduce certain categories which Prop created, or they have tried to possibly add something to what Prop did. But in a way, they began with Prop in their mind. So Prop is central in that respect. Meanwhile, we can make another observation that in structuralist theory, you also have something called micropoetics, and you also have macropoetics. So this work of Prop, or this work of Todorov, is an aspect of micropoetics, where they are talking about some basic units, and those basic units in narratives, they can be used, they can be used to talk about those narratives. On the other hand, if there is another dimension of structuralism, which is macropoetics, something which Northrop Frye represented, and about which some mention has been made in this discussion, where he talks about entire genres, where he talks about seasons, where he talks about epic, tragedy, so on. So micropoetics and macropoetics. And one more important thing here is that was discussed earlier, and that was that when we discuss structuralist theory, we also see this criticism of structuralist theory. And what is that criticism of structuralist theory? That it often forgets the specific features of an individual work. So if Prop is talking about Russian fairy tales, he's talking about the basic structure of those fairy tales. If Todorov is talking about those tales, he's also talking about the basic structure of those tales. But what happens to one individual tale? What happens when I start reading a novel or a story, or when I start watching a film? There is something unique also maybe about that film. There is something striking about that film. There is something individual. There is obviously some individual features in a poem or in a narrative or in a film. So what happens to those things, right? And here you see that the theorist has talked about all possible things in a work, and this work by Balzac becomes important because Balzac is considered a realist, but Barthes' analysis proves him somebody entirely different, but rather Barthes' analysis shows Balzac as somebody who uses different devices. Now, it is important in another sense also. And why it is important in another sense? Because when we look at the work of Barthes in totality, then his work offers a kind of critique of the presumption of innocence which was there all around when he was living. His context is French scene, that means France of 1950s and 60s when he was writing. In his very important book, and that is titled Writing, Writing, Zero, Writing, Writing Degree Zero, Writing Degree Zero. Now, what does Barthes do in that work? He discusses a certain kind of problem which classical French style of writing faced in the second half of the 19th century. What happens was that from the beginning of the first decade, or rather first half, from mid 19th century, they developed different styles of writing. Before that, in France, classical French style of writing reigned supreme. There are certain features of that style of writing. There was a particular way in which a character was developed. There was a particular way in which stories were told. In fact, that classical French style of writing was so dominant that it was considered the natural style of writing if somebody wanted to write fiction. That means it eliminated the possibility of all other forms of writings. So much so that this form of writing, this style of writing was considered natural. But a certain kind of crisis gripped this style of writing from mid 19th century onwards, and you see that from mid 19th century onward, they have developed different styles of writings, and we can possibly talk about some of these styles of writings. Now, what are some of those styles of writings? Think about the writing that is associated with somebody like Camus, whose work Plague actually is being talked about these days a lot. Think about the style of writing that is associated with Ernest Hemingway, right? That is one particular style of writing. On the other hand, you also have a particular style of writing
So there are
which you identify with James Joyce.
there are yet again
which you identify with
breaks in the sound.
Marcel Proust, if we look at the French scene. Now let us just quickly talk about Hemingway's style of writing or Camus' style of writing. Hemingway tries to pass off his writing as something which is very, very bare, which doesn't use any devices, which doesn't use any ornamentation whatsoever. Very bare style of writing, very transparent style of writing, right? In fact, Hemingway's style is so unique that you also have every year a competition where certain pretenders or participants they try to write in Hemingway's style. His style is so unique now, but at the time when it emerged, Hemingway's style was considered a styleless style. That means a style which had no style, bare, transparent, and so was Camus. How does say outsider begin? Camus talks, say the narrator talks about the death in his family, but he is talking about that death in a very matter of fact manner, as if nothing happened. Nothing happened. And similarly, there are other styles of writing which emerged. James Joyce, for example. Now, James Joyce's style of writing, where a particular movement is important, the writer tries to capture that movement, and so sometimes that style becomes so difficult to follow, especially in his works like Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake, that it has very few readers left. But that is a very distinct style of writing. Joyce has his own followers. Now, when all these different styles started emerging from mid 19th century onwards, that French style of writing, classical French style of writing, faced a crisis, because till that time that French style of writing was not considered a style at all. It was considered the natural way of writing. Now Barthes from here comes to a very important observation, that all writing is a style, and this is a kind of structuralist notion, that all writing is a style. And when all writing is a style, that means something which was considered the natural form of writing, French classical school, that was also considered a style of writing. There was nothing natural about it. That means there cannot be any writing which does not use any style. You cannot have any writing. So even these virtues of writing, precision, for example, say writing has to be precise, or writing has to be clear, or writing has to be very, say, lucid. So even these words, lucidity, precision, clarity, these are also aspects of style. So Barthes is saying that you don't have any piece of writing which is not a style of writing, right? This means that classical French school practiced a certain form of writing which was considered natural, which was a dominant mode of writing, that was also a style. And so Barthes' assumption that there is no innocence, there is no innocent style, there is no style which is innocent of any artifice, any method, any devices, right? Now that style of writing actually faced a crisis, and this is the reason, because a particular lifestyle, a particular way of life, a particular ideology which supported that writing, that started disintegrating at that time. So that means a particular bourgeois lifestyle, middle class, a particular say set of bourgeois values, a particular set of bourgeois behavior, characteristics, they supported that style of writing, and their purpose was to make the bourgeois style of writing, or bourgeois forms of behavior, or bourgeois forms of lifestyles natural, because the writing was considered natural. So anything that was associated with bourgeois lifestyle, that was also considered natural. That means if they ate in a certain way, that was considered natural. If they sat in a particular way, then that was considered natural. And similarly, if they wrote in a particular way, then that was also considered natural. And because that bourgeois way of life started disintegrating from this period onwards, and so this style of writing also faced a crisis. And so Barthes' view that all writing is style. There are other important concepts which are associated with Barthes. He made a distinction between two different kinds of writings, and he also made a distinction between two different kinds of writers, right? So for example, there is a form of writing, and here we are talking about certain texts where there is very smooth flow of ideas. This form of writing is called readerly text. Readerly text. But there is another kind of text where you don't have that kind of smooth flow of ideas. That text is called writerly text. There is a distinction here. In readerly text, readers have no role to play. In writerly text, they have a lot of role. They have to interpret, they have to understand, they have to unravel things. In readerly text, signifiers probably move in a very smooth fashion, and it is readerly text talk about something, and this is important. Readerly text talk about something. Writerly text talk. Readerly text talk about something, convey something, try to convey something clearly, but writerly texts are not interested in conveying something very clearly. And here we can recall Roman Jakobson's poetic function of language, where medium is important for its own sake. Poetic function of language, where words are important because of the sound that they carry, because of the rhythm that they carry, because of say their shape, all those things. That means they are important for their own sake and not to convey any meaning in a very transparent manner. And so here readerly text and writerly text are different in the sense that in readerly text you talk about the world, they are talking about the world, they are saying something, they are communicating something. But writerly texts do not talk about anything as such. And so there is an element of indulgence about this kind of writing. And from readerly text and writerly text we come to another important point, and that important point is that there are also writers who talk about something, but there are writers for them writing is everything. There are writers who talk about the world through their writing. They are writers, but there is another set called authors. They, for them, writing is important for its own sake. Words are important for their own sake. And so in this, signifiers in a way dance. In readerly text, signifiers move. In writerly text, signifiers dance. In readerly text, readers do not have to do much. They don't have a role. They follow everything clearly. But in writerly text, readers become co-producers of meaning. They work hard at the meaning. They try to interpret. They have a role. Or if we use another classification given by Umberto Eco, one important theorist, there are open texts and there are closed texts. Closed texts are those texts where readers don't have to do much. But open texts are those texts where readers are almost co-producers of meaning. And so open texts relate to writerly text, and closed text and Eco's category. Closed text relate to readerly text. So readerly text and writer, writerly text and author. This is the classification which is offered by Roland Barthes. Now this leads us to another important aspect, that in writerly text you have pleasure which leads to ecstasy. And why? Because a particular break point comes where meaning breaks, where there is a kind of stalemate, where there is a kind of ambiguity. But at this moment, and this is a precise moment when those writerly texts also produce a moment of ecstasy, bliss, right? So Barthes' famous distinction, and you can also see many texts around you which talk about this. Now, for a while, I'm closing this discussion because we will move from here to his analysis of SZ, and there he also offers his theory of five codes. From Barthes, we will move on to another important theorist. His name is Gerald Genet, and Gerald Genet is considered a kind of low structuralist. He's not a star performer like Barthes, but he is a very useful theorist, right? So maybe I close this discussion here, and you can come with a point or two. And let me welcome some very important participants who joined the discussion today. Professor Baharul Islam, his director, Indian Institute of Management, Kashipur. And then another very important person, she was a topper here, Noor Afsha. He also holds a very important position. Their love of literature and their love of Aligarh and their love of English department brought them here. Bahar, can you hear me? Are you there? Noor Afsha, are you there?
Yes, sir. I can hear you. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, you can just say hello to all your.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's a great opportunity, sir. I'm so happy to hear you and have such an enriching session with you. Thank you so much.
We'll have many more sessions because these days I think you must be working from home. Right.
Ah, yes. I'll be there in all the sessions.
Oh, thank you. We'll hear something from you also.
You.
And what about
Inshallah,
Taj Muhammad?
inshallah.
Taj
Thank
Muhammad
you.
is there? Taj? Okay. So let me give say hand over for one final comment to somebody from a second semester. Final comment. Or maybe a quick